If you want your metal drum mixes to sound like the punchy and powerful sounds on your favorite records, then identifying and avoiding these simple mixing errors will level up your drum sound in a big way. And really paying attention to this stuff has made a big impact on the records I've worked on in recent years. So in this video, I'll show you exactly what these mistakes are and how avoiding them will quickly and easily give you that powerful and professional sound that you're looking for. Okay, so up first is over compressing your snare drum or just having too much transient on it. So when Solosis were in the studio with Scott Atkins in 2010 doing Edge of the Earth, I pulled up one of my demos and we were referencing one of the riffs that we were thinking of changing. And when he started playing it in his studio, he just went, Jesus, that snare's taking my face off. And he didn't mean that in a good way. It was just that the snare was so compressed and so loud, it was just poking through in a really annoying way on top of the whole mix. Now, the problem most people have when they're starting off, you'll listen to your snare in solo and you'll add compression and you start to hear what the compressor's doing, adding in a ton more smack, thinking that that's going to give you a heavy sound. The problem with this is that very quickly just turns into a short blip in the mix. And then to compensate, you turn the snare up too loud. So you've just got this really loud blip that just pokes through and you don't really hear any of the body of the snare drum. So how do you fix this? Well, there are a few ways you can do it. Number one, you can just try backing off the compressor if you're over compressing. The second thing you can do, particularly if you're working with a real snare drum and you need to balance out that performance with a lot of compression, is add a transient designer before compression, but just use it to boost a lot of sustain. And then what you can do after compression is then clip or saturate the snare to kind of take off that really aggressive transient edge. Another thing you can do is use parallel compression to bring up more of the sustain of the drums, and this will help balance out any snare drums that are just a bit too focused on that front end transient. Now in metal, we want our drums to sound punchy and powerful, so adding in some hard attack with the transient designer or compressing is something that is commonly done. You just have to then balance that out with some sort of sustain from the drum so you hear a bit more of the body coming through at the same time. My personal preference when it comes to mixing a snare drum is compressing it and then using saturation and a clipper after compression to shave off that really pokey transient. Once you've balanced out the attack of your snare, this means all you then need to do is just balance it into your mix, which leads on to the next point. So up next, I'm talking about leveling and just balancing out your drum mix. We all want our drums to sound powerful, but sometimes it can be like body dysmorphia when someone just goes to the gym, they don't think they're big enough and they just want to get more jacked, more jacked. And what starts to happen, people just start bringing up their kick and their snare and their kick and their snare and just bring it up till they're just too loud in the mix. Sometimes you need to take a step back, re-EQ or just rebalance your mix and just trust that it probably is loud enough. You just need to reference something else to give you some context. Particularly with snares and toms, clipping is a great way to bring in some perceived volume. For toms in particular, I like to limit these quite hard to take off their transient and bring out a bit more sustain of the drum so you can have them louder in the mix without them poking through in the same way. And speaking of leveling things out, there is one piece of the kit that never gets the respect it deserves, and that is your overheads. The most common problem I hear in amateur mixes is they're just too quiet or they're too thin sounding. Now the way to fix this, particularly if you're a guitarist mixing, is turn them up way louder than you think they need to be. And if they're sounding thin, try adding like a really wide boost around 1K just to bring up more body of the cymbals and add some like tape saturation to kind of give some more warmth to them. It's really common to high pass filter and take out a ton of the low end, but see how much low end you can leave in your overheads without it interfering with your mix too much. Now in really fast heavy music, it's not as easy to get as much low end from your overheads, which is fine, but if they're sounding a bit thin, try backing that off just a bit. Now, speaking of overheads, this leads on to the next problem, and this is phase alignment. So if you have your overheads at a decent level and your snare is starting to sound quite thin, that's probably because the phase relationship between your overheads and your snare top mic in particular just isn't working. I would always check the phase on my overheads and just invert it and see how it sounded. But more recently, I've got into manually moving my overhead tracks and lining them up by eye. And you can either do this or you can use something like auto align to do it for you. This is my snare track. These are my overheads. Nothing has been done to these. I haven't aligned them or phase inverted them, and this is how they sound together. Now I can go onto my EQ for my overheads and invert the phase and listen to what that does. And that's how a lot of records were made back in the day before the digital age. But you can be a bit more refined and just manually shift your overheads like this. Now, I made them sound slightly thinner, even though they look like they might be in phase. The problem with this is that I have this high pass filter engaged. So let's listen to the phase being flicked in and out on this. So just having a play and nudging these around ever so slightly to try and get the fattest sound, this is the best way to see if your phase relationship between your snare top and your overheads is working. Now, what's really important to remember, particularly in the context of modern metal production, the overheads are usually the only human thing left in your drum mix. Usually people are triggering kick, drum, snare, all the toms, and your overheads are the only human element that is left. And they add a lot of energy and heaviness and intensity to your mix. And most commonly, I hear people brightening these up way more than they really need to be. Up next, I'm going to talk about context. Now, everyone says you should never mix in solo and just mix in context of the whole song. And as much as this is true, nearly all of us start by building up our signal chains in solo, and that's fine. Everyone does it. There's no problem with it. So when you start dialing in your kick sound, you can do it in solo. Same with every piece of your mix. But a good practice is to quickly get your drums in a place where you think they sound good, then move on to guitars, move on to bass, get them in a rough ballpark where you think they sound good. And then once your guitars and bass are in the mix, then you should revisit your drums. The reason being, once you've got this wall of guitars and bass on top of your whole mix, which clouds up everything, you'll then really hear where the high-end attack is on your kick drum, where that's poking through, and that might need to move now that you can hear it in context of the song. You may have dialed in a snare sound that you really like, but again, within context of guitars and bass, it probably still sounds too dull, and you're adding 10 dB more of high-end just to get it to cut through. And again, when it comes to overheads, with your guitars in the mix now, you may find that they need to come up considerably to compete. So now you've got your drums in a better place. Are you overlooking the most crucial part of your guitar tone? Check out this video next.